Hello, everyone, and welcome to our talk. We're going to be talking a bit about holistic storytelling, and specifically holistic storytelling in our debut indie title, Röki. I'm Alex,
I'm Tom.
and we're from Polygon Treehouse, which is a relatively new indie studio based in and around Cambridge, with other people working all over the place. But yeah, we're really excited to be here and to share with you a bit of insight into what it is we've been trying to do with the game and the kind of story we've been trying to tell and some of the techniques that we've been using. So now the intro is done, we thought we'd talk a little bit about holistic storytelling and what that actually means. So there's loads of different ways of telling stories, especially in games. You can tell a story without any dialogue, you can tell a story without any pictures. There's loads of different options, and I guess as a studio, our approach, we have the term holistic storytelling, which we coined to try and sum it up, whereas we try and take advantage of all the different things and elements that video games offer to try and make the most of the narrative experience and to really maximize the impact of the story for the player. So we're going to run through some of those things, and that might range from gameplay as a storytelling device, music, cinematography, a whole load of things. So there's a lot of ground to cover, and this will be quite an informal chat where we'll just take you through some of the things we've tried to do and about how we've done them in the game.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things we should probably give a quick summary of before we start talking about it is the actual story of Röki. Give a bit of foundation there for the chat to come. So Röki's a story about a young girl called Tuve and her family, and essentially what she's trying to do is to save her brother. Her brother's been taken by a mysterious creature called Röki, which the game's named after. She doesn't know why, no one knows what his reasons for that are, or where Lars has been taken. So it's up to Tuve to venture into the ancient wilderness to try and track him down and use all her kind of wits and charm to get information from lots of different creatures and escape different creatures and then ultimately get to where her brother is. And I guess at its heart, it's a story about family and loss and acceptance. There are some darker themes that run beneath it, but also at its kind of higher level, it's heavily inspired by Scandinavian folklore. So a lot of the creatures Tuve meets are taken directly from folklore and pushed into Röki, and they all have their own stories and they have their own kind of quests that Tuve can help them with, and all of that serves to create a very rich palette and world for her to explore and adventure through. So as Alex said, how we try and layer up the different story elements there for Tuve, for Röki, for her family, for these creatures, how we try and convey that to the player is in lots of different ways. So it's not just a very long cutscene, or it's not a movie. It's an interactive game. So we've tried to use different tools at our disposal to do that in a really interesting and meaningful way. And hopefully that's what we'll touch on in this talk.
Yeah, I think part of our what made us take this approach or start to explore this approach was we've worked on plenty of games in the past where there has been big, long, linear cutscenes. The way you have a cutscene, then you have gameplay, of cutscene, and the gameplay, and sometimes that can be fine. But actually, we're much more interested in the power, harnessing the power of games, of telling a story via gameplay. There's been a few, especially in terms of building a character's relationship. You have games like Brothers, Tales of Two Sons, Ico, where actually through the gameplay mechanics itself and you playing the game, you form a strong bond, an emotional bond with some of the characters in the game. I think that's a really powerful thing, and there's something that's maybe unique to games. Something that games it's unique that you can only do that that kind of interactive building of bonds through a game. So yeah, it's really a really powerful thing, and I'm guessing we do that with Röki in a number of ways. I'm guessing in looking at kind of getting the story out of the cutscenes and into the games, like what are you tasked with doing, and making sure that the narrative is intrinsic in the puzzle design as well. So it's not like, okay, we're doing this gameplay stuff and it's separate, and then we're doing a story stuff. It's looking at the entire design of the game as a storytelling thing from the ground up, and kind of running with it from there.
Yeah, so I guess to give an example of that, so the first act of the game is very much about establishing the family, establishing Tube and her brother Lars and their relationship, and then their relationship with their father Heinrich. So, I mean, that's important in terms of the actual quest and what's happening in the game, and the inciting incident that occurs when Lars gets taken. But it's also important in terms of establishing how Tube feels about Lars, giving the player some information about what their family setup is without being too literal or prescriptive about that. So there are kind of a couple of ways we do that. The first is in exploring her relationship with Lars. We try and do that through gameplay, whether it's them playing hide and seek, or the fact that Tube has to cook his dinner because she's a bit of a surrogate mother. And these also serve to introduce the player to gameplay mechanics, but at the same time they're kind of softly giving some exposition and insight into what their everyday life is. And then the second thing we do is actually, because the game's been fully 3D, you can explore as Tube, and we allow the player to go around, and there are certain things you can interact with that she'll then comment on. So, for example, the exterior on the house, there's an old well that she can go over to, and she'll comment on that, saying something like, "Oh, I wonder if Mama's things are all still down there." And that's it, and it's just like a little thread of something that makes sense as you progress through the story, but it's something there that the player has agency to go and look at. They interact with it themselves. They do it in a very active way, rather than us kind of pushing that information to them. It's there as like this soft exposition, and equally they can, ignore that, and there's no detriment to the story, but it's like these extra breadcrumbs of things that they can kind of slowly assimilate as they go through. And so the combination of that stuff, I think, actually makes a very effective way of telling a story without literally having to tell the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like the player is an active part. They're playing an active role in the story and almost unearthing it for themselves, like a bit of a detective, and having some of those things where it generates some intrigue. If there's things that you encounter and you examine it early on in the game, it's like, oh, what does that mean? I don't quite. You can leave some mystery there, and then it makes it very satisfying when you find out the meaning and some of the connotations of those things later on in the game, and you get some resolution on the what's been happening. But I think that it's almost like archaeological storytelling that people, when we've been showing the demo of the game, people they're piecing together little bits of information they're discovering for themselves. Right, they're going and examining things. They're building up a picture of the world and the lore for themselves, and that's quite a powerful way of telling a story that's pretty unique to video games. Having that, really building up that picture, and it's kind of nice because it means you start off with a lot of mystery and a lot of intrigue. And I'm a big fan of the From Software games, and obviously predominantly they are games about quite hardcore games about getting through all these exploring these cathedral cities, or and having big really super hard boss fights. But actually their archaeological storytelling is really interesting. How it doesn't really disrupt you in the world, doesn't really tell you very much about it, and allows you to explore, and gradually you build up this picture and a framework of what's going on. That's quite an exciting and satisfying way to tell a story, I think. Especially, I think, if stories in games become overly didactic, where it's like, okay, watch this cutscene, people tend to dial out a little bit. I think having the games that are the most powerful telling stories when they're doing it via gameplay. So that's kind of something we very much tried to embrace. And also, I'm guessing having gaps in the story as well. So like if you're uncovering these things as you're exploring, it also allows the possibility of narrative gaps, because different things will resonate with different people. And so having like narrative gaps and breathing space, so it's not just like a wall of story, having a chance for the player to kind of reflect on what's going on and maybe drawing parallels with their own experiences is an equally as important part. Because if you're in a piece of music, the piece of music can't be up at 11 being loud all the way through. You need to have that contrast within story as well, and that's a really important thing, to have those breathing spaces. That was something we looked at quite early on in development.
Yeah, definitely. And I think some of that comes from actually layering all these things up as well. So it's not as though you're going from like story mode to gameplay mode back to story mode. It's like actually everything is slightly more seamless, and so you can have these kind of highs and lows and breathing points, as Alex said. But one of the other interesting things I think we discovered is that when you introduce characters to people, they will form opinions of them very quickly, even if they don't actually say that much, and that can be down to how they look, how they move, how they interact with the world around them. And so for us, like our first scene is Tuve and her brother Lars. Like, so getting the tone right there in their relationship and making sure you set it up in a way that allows you to go in the direction you need to go, I think is really important, and something actually like originally we started off and that I think made Lars too annoying, because we kind of wanted to reflect the fact that maybe he was a slightly full of life younger brother that Tuve loved, but was a bit like, oh, you're kind of a bit of a drag. But actually, like, it's an instant introduction to those characters. It just didn't make her come across very well, because the player's reaction to her was just like, oh, she's just like really aggy and just gets annoyed with this kid. So we dialed that back a bit and made their relationship just a bit more fun, and had aspects of that, but in a much gentler and softer way, so that you could kind of pick up on it a bit without it being kind of hammered home. And so I think those little things, and in terms of how the characters look as well, and making sure that people, you can project onto them, and that people don't immediately kind of push back against what you want them to be, I think is really important. Because the most interesting stories are where characters, perhaps their experiences take unexpected turns, or they have shades of grey to their personality, and that's why it's important, I think, to allow growth in characters, and make sure you don't start off in like, well, my perception is this, and it's then going to be very hard to shift me out of that box into something else.
Yeah, and that's really true, and that kind of comes back to that holistic storytelling thing, because we could write the character in a certain way, or the dialogue that they're saying, but actually it's about everything. It's about how they animate, how they act. There's a whole load of things that are laid up to get to inform a character's performance. So it's trying to take a much more rounded approach. But it was very interesting what Tom was saying about shades of grey, and that being interesting. And that's very much something that we've tried to put into the game, and we've tried to, like, some of the relationships that we build up between Tuve and her family, we try and almost reflect in some of the monsters in the game and some of their relationships together. So I think there's interesting ways, and the game is a non-violent game. It's about using your brains to unlock paths deeper into the forest, but when you encounter monsters in the game, they are essentially like the puzzles themselves. And like in some games, you when you meet monsters, you try and stab them or shoot them or lop their heads off. In our game, when you meet a monster, it's almost about trying to understand what's bugging them, and maybe you can help them with their issues, and then they in turn, in kind, will unlock paths deeper into the forest. And some of the monsters are scarier than others. But again, that's a nice story structure, because a monster as a puzzle, there's something that's bugging them, that's linked to their story and what's going on with them. And then in helping them, you can help progress their story and resolve the conflict that they're experiencing, and opening up a path deeper into the forest to you. So actually, these monsters as puzzles is a really nice storytelling device in itself. It's not like there's the puzzle and then there's the story. It's all one thing. Yeah,
and I think one of the things we really like, and as I touched on earlier, is because it's inspired by Scandinavian folklore, the notion of the story being told through the eyes of children. Tuve is like a teenager. She's a young woman, but she still has like aspects of childhood with her, and that allows her to see the world through slightly unprejudiced eyes. And so she's able to meet these creatures and kind of almost accept them at face value a bit more. That was something we directly took out of folklore. Like, often the heroes of those stories would be the children, because they were able to kind of summon courage or strength and make friends with unlikely allies that adults wouldn't have been able to do. We thought that was a really good starting point for this, and then actually you can then subvert some of that stuff. So it's not to say we've kind of removed all prejudice for the game, but instead we put that on perhaps how the monsters perceive Tuve instead. So it's flipped to their kind of prejudice against humans or men or girls or whatever. You can start to play with things a bit more in a more interesting way, because you've immediately kind of changed the rules from the start. So I think that's allowed for a much kind of richer experience.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's been really interesting to see people's reactions to how we are telling the story in the game, and people really falling in love with monsters that would be quite scary, but obviously they've grown quite an emotional attachment to it. Again, a monster is not evil. There are shades of grey there, and why they're acting. And I think that depth there, we've tried to not have any like two-dimensional characters where it's just they're out and out bad, which just makes for a more interesting story. So I guess we'll talk about some of the other things that we layer up in terms of holistic storytelling. And one of the ones that's maybe underutilized in games is cinematography. And we tried to, well, I think one, because we want to make quite an accessible game that people can pick up and play, and so we didn't want to have a free cam, because some people can struggle with a free cam when they're playing a game. It's sometimes perceived as like everyone knows how to do that, but actually a lot of people don't and really struggle with that. And so, but in taking back control and having a more orchestrated camera where we control it as creators, it allows us to leverage that as a storytelling device. It allows us to kind of build all our worlds to the camera for kind of, so we can compose all our images and shots nicely, and really use cinematography as a storytelling device. So, and this can be as simple as like gentle ease tracking in and out of the camera to kind of ratchet up the tension. But one of the things that the main thing we do, which is kind of littered throughout the game, is we have this what's called like predator cameras. It's not like the Arnie film, it kind of is, but they're basically cameras that we sit in the undergrowth, almost like they're a creature in themselves, and they'll track Tuve as she moves around the forest. And this can be quite a subtle thing, but there's a kind of a layer of being watched from the undergrowth that can be quite threatening. And with a lot of these things, and that's like gameplay as well, that's not like in a cutscene. This is as you're playing the gameplay, there is cinematography at work to give you a narrative steer and an ingredient that's layered up. And it's quite subtle, but like with all these storytelling ingredients, it's about the layering up of subtle things to give a symphony. And each piece, an element in itself, may initial glance appear insignificant, but if you layer up enough of them, you'll start to get a strong feeling and a sense of place and a sense of story. And like when we were talking about this, I was trying to think about games that use like cinematography to help tell the story. You have like games that will desaturate things when you're running low of health. You have some driving games where they'll kind of do some focal length crushes to make you feel like you're going faster when you're hitting a boost button. But it's quite rare for like games to really leverage cinematography within their gameplay. I think the original, like Resident Evil, due to technical constraints, had quite Hitchcock cameras that were quite extreme, and that added a sense of it was quite restrictive. You couldn't see what was around the corner, which again added to the sense of fear and trepidation when you were playing those games. So it can be really powerful. Even like Resident Evil 4, they did a different camera thing where it was very tight on Leon's shoulders going around, which means you don't have great visibility. Again, it ratchets up that sense of fear and the unknown. So there is something really powerful there in the use of cinematography in gameplay. So it's something that we try to leverage in these predator cams, just to ratchet up the slight uncertainness or the unseen threat of the forest itself.
Interesting anecdote on the Resident Evil things, which as an example of what you're talking about. I think I played it back when I was in the school. Shows my age. One of my friends was playing the first Resident Evil game, and there's a bit where you're kind of going down a passage and there's windows on your right, and it appears that everything's okay, and then two dogs jump through the window to attack you. But it's so well done, and because the framing's so successful and the timing of it, because it's basically all orchestrated, but it doesn't feel like a cutscene because you're actively participating in it. But yeah, he threw his controller down on the ground and broke it because he was like just reacted so vehemently to what had happened, and it's kind of stuck with me to this day that was such a successful use of, like, particularly in the horror genre, where it's, you know, a shock reaction, but it's still all set up by the use of the cameras and the timing, and I think that's something we've been able to play about with in Röki as well, by using those same kind of set pieces.
And yeah, and that set piece in itself is so much more powerful and impactful for being part of gameplay and not like a cutscene. If you were just watching that in a cutscene, you'd be like, okay, well, that's, you know, maybe a bit scary. But the fact that I'm in the game, I'm playing the game when that happens as part of gameplay, it makes it all the more powerful. Yeah, so that's a bit about the cinematography, and obviously another big aspect of storytelling, or another big ingredient in games, and one that is often, I wouldn't say overlooked, but maybe like left until later, is audio and music. And I think we've done a lot of made a lot of games before when we were at Sony, and I think we knew when we were going in how important audio was going to be, especially if we want to tell an emotional journey. So that was something we started a journey, and like looking for collaborators, we started off like pretty early on in the project, and yeah, we work with a composer called Jason, or Aether is his musical pseudonym, and
Stage name.
Yeah, and Ali, who's our sound designer. They've both been working together to create interactive audio and non-linear audio and music. And that's, again, when we're looking at kind of unique strengths. Obviously, you have music in a game. You have music in a movie, and it helps to heighten the emotion. If you watch a scary movie and you took the soundtrack off, it wouldn't feel very scary. It's a really key ingredient that helps to kind of modify the emotion in anything, any story. And so yeah, with games, it's much more of a challenge because it's not a linear. You don't start at the beginning and then the player can choose to go and explore something else. And so you have to have something that's more. To have something that can modify the mood in a similar way, you have to have something that's much more intelligent and reactive.
Yeah, so I was just thinking it's like perfect timing that we're talking about audio. My son's chosen this as that moment to run around the house really loudly. You wouldn't think he was a small 8-year-old boy. But yeah, I think the interesting thing about audio is it can just do so much for you as well and do a lot of the heavy lifting. Like we were talking about Resident Evil earlier, and not to use it as an example, but there's another great bit where you kind of come back into the house after the enemy changes for the kind of more reptilian creatures, and you can hear them before you see them. Like you can hear them clicking, and it's so powerful because you start to listen for them, and it becomes very intense because of the sound they make. And it shows like how powerful audio can be. So we were very aware that was something we could use both with sound effects and with music to help convey, a bigger world, or to help convey emotion in certain bits. And actually that ties in really nicely with what Alex was saying about having gaps and breathing spaces. Those are times when then you can just let the music play, and you can listen to that, and kind of it's there in the background. You're not really consciously taking it in, but it's kind of subtly changing your perception of the mood. So you can kind of increase tension, or you can make the player feel safer. Particularly kind of in a forest environment, and that goes hand in hand with like color palettes and things as well. They're all very like all devices that you can kind of subtly tweak and slowly ratchet up to suddenly actually you've gone from here to here, which is very different, but you haven't really realised the transition because it's been over a number of scenes, and it very quickly can change your perception of events and whether you kind of feel uneasy or you feel safe, and then you can kind of subvert that expectation, or it's a really kind of crucial device, I think.
Yeah, so I guess maybe it needs a little bit of explanation when we talk about like interactive music and like non-linear audio. Well, basically, if you're playing a record and the song starts and it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then when the song is finished, it will stop. With interactive audio, what it is basically the music is authored in a certain way that it can be split up into chunks, and you can the game can intelligently pick which paths it takes and loops round. So it's almost like this audio engine as you're playing the game. There's almost like a conductor there or a composer there who's splicing together. He's making choices based on what the player is doing and reacting to what the player is doing to help construct and build the music as you're going. So it can be quite it basically can make the game feel like it's alive and you are playing this interactive it's this interactive experience the game is reacting to, and it's very powerful. And like a simple example is in the game when Röki appears in Act 1, we have these almost like tribal drums that can come in, so when he's approaching you'll hear this drum, and it's like a precursor to his arrival, and they'll come in and they'll fade out with some of his movement. It's just an extra thing that's like, okay, something's happening, but the fact that can happen at any point because the music is non-linear it's a really powerful thing. It gives us a lot of options to do interesting things with the music, and we do it a lot to signify place and changes in the world state to reinforce like where you are and what's going on, especially in the third act of the game, which we won't talk too much about because it's got quite a lot of spoilers. We do some quite interesting things with the music, and when there's certain emotional bits, the music will swell up, and then it will dissipate again. Again, this is all linked to you playing the game. When you're hitting one of these key moments in the game, the music will go, okay, right, let's deploy all the heartstrings that we're going to pull on, but it's doing it in a very dynamic, reactive way. So when you're playing, it feels like magical. This is being orchestrated based on the player and what they're doing.
I think one of the other aspects as well, when you touched on like the drums for Röki, but I think we've got different musical instruments almost assigned to different characters as well. So like you've got that, and you can actually just bring that instrument in for a few notes. It doesn't have to be much, but it's like it's it's kind of in your subconscious that it's attached to that certain character, so it can very quickly take your mind to them and hook you in emotionally into what that perhaps Tuve is feeling at that time if she's thinking about that character, or it's a little reminder about what that character if you've not experienced them for a while, and having kind of particular themes attached to them as well. It's a very powerful way of like quickly weaving them back into the story without having to have some kind of really convoluted cutscene or exposition. We found that's what worked really well.
And I guess part of that is the importance of considering audio as rather than an afterthought or something that comes after you've designed the game, actually bringing that stuff forward and like one of the key building blocks of the game, and considering that stuff early on. I guess also that we do have we're talking about holistic storytelling. We do have a lot of dialogue in the game as well. We're working with a narrative designer, Sam, and we've got Danny and Emma who are writers as well. So obviously the dialogue, you can make games without dialogue at all, but the dialogue was really important for us. It's not we're not saying the dialogue isn't important. Of course it is. It's a really important part. But what we're trying to emphasize is there's other things you can layer up to really emphasize and make the story sing. And I guess back to the dialogue and going back to the audio side, the other thing is that in the kind of emote library system that we have in the game, and the kind of the VO of when we have lines of dialogue, and how we use that to get more of a character performance. So as a brief overview, we have this emote library system where we've worked with some actors, and they make these emotive sounds. We tried doing full VO, but for us, like obviously everyone is different, and all this stuff is with the caveat of this is our process and what felt right for us, and it's not by all means the definitive way that people should be doing things. But we found that with full VO, which we did do tests with, it felt like it was getting in the way of the story, and people want to skip it and clip it off short. So we did some tests with an emote library system where we've got 40 or 50 like emotive sounds that Tuve or the other characters will make, and we can pick and choose them, and we can tag dialogue lines so that there might be a puzzled sound, like, or it might be angry, like, and obviously they're much better performed than I just did then. But we again use those to not get in the way of the gameplay, but then to to allow to definitely have that human imprint, because without that it felt a little bit flat, or you weren't getting that emotion impact.
I think it's a nice balance. It kind of gives you a suggestion of an emotion and then allows the player to kind of project across the rest of the speech. Otherwise you're relying on like really, really good performances, which is obviously achievable, but it's another, I think it puts a lot of pressure on that to deliver what you need, and actually doesn't allow for much flexibility. One of the things we were able to do in our system was actually go right close to the end with kind of rewrites. So there was a point we had to stop for localization, but we were able to, because we weren't recording the lines, we were able to kind of keep iteratively updating them. And I think one of the real strengths for that was that we were able to have, our core story that ran through, that hasn't changed dramatically since the start. But then there were like aspects of that we were able to kind of weave through into secondary characters, or there's this notion that like Tube calls Lars her little Tomte, which is the Tomte is a mythological creature, and like in folklore, he's like a house gnome that will come out and help you, and she might find one in the game, but she's kind of called him that from the start. But because she then enters this world of folklore and does actually start to find out about real Tomtes, there's this kind of overlap there that can cross-reference to her missing Lars, and they might feed back to her. So it just creates a much stronger link to this original narrative stream and gives it more weight and depth. And that was actually something that came in quite late, that we were able to kind of almost sew up these different things and connect them together. And there's other examples of that, but that I think has been a real strength. I'm kind of really pleased with how that's gone. I think we wouldn't have been able to do if we had gone down the dialogue recording route.
Yeah, the full VO.
Yeah,
and it's just basically allowed us lots of flexibility. And we have tried to make it very very natural. And well, I guess when we were talking earlier about layering up ingredients to create a sense of story and a sense of place, like in the recording sessions, like Ingvild is an actress we got recommended to us. She plays Tube, and actually we did some tests early on with some of our Scandinavian friends to try and see that even without fully voiced lines, whether you'd get the subtle hint of their accents through these emotive sounds, and we definitely did. And so we've worked with Scandinavian actors to try and bring the game to life, which is it's about in itself not something that really clubs you over the head, but it's about layering up these different things in terms of like lighting, cinematography, audio, to create a strong sense of place. And for me, from like talking about the audio and the emotion library side of things, it's from the animation point of view, it's essential, because we put a lot of effort into our characters so they can have very expressive faces that can be read at a distance, because we can be quite dynamic with the camera because everything's 3D. And so we really did lots of tests early on to make sure you could still read expressions when Tube was quite small. But no matter how much effort you put in as an animator to try and sell emotion, having the VO emotive sounds makes my life so much easier. It does a lot of the heavy lifting. It really humanises and softens the characters. So that was a really key part of bringing it to life. And we weren't sure what impact it would have. But I think when like Danny and Ali and me and Tom were in the remote recording session with Ingvild, we were just like, look, this is going to be really good. It's going to make such a big difference. And as we all got a little bit emotional, going, suddenly a character where we kind of tried really hard to bring to life, suddenly we just knew that the recording with Ingvild was really going to elevate things and make a massive difference, which it has. But yeah, one example who's not a Scandinavian actor who's in the game.
My son, not me. We got, partly because we were, considering, do we try and get an adult to do a child's voice? And actually we thought, he was probably maybe 6 at the time we did the recordings. So a good age match. So we thought we'd try and see what we could get out of him first. And actually it was kind of very successful, particularly with some really strong voice direction from me, just by teasing him or, poking the right buttons to get the right performance for like angry or frustrated. So that stuff I think has been really, really good. And again,
bad dad.
Bad dad, quite, because there was the actual suite of things we needed to create was not overwhelming. It became a very accessible thing to, that's why we've got a mic and stuff, to just buy that stuff and do it at home and run it through our sound designer to tidy up, and then it's in game. So it's kind of, I think, a good example where you can, we had Ingvild for Tuve, who's a really quality actress, and then we had some friends for some of the other characters, and then my son for Lars. So it's kind of a real suite of different people, which I think is one of the nice things about the game as well. It's like a collaborative effort and feels like a very indie way of doing things.
Yeah, totally. And I think I think the audio, so you've got the music side, you've got the VO remote library side. So it's really it's a really pivotal part of the project. And I think, like anything, if you stripped the audio out of the game, it would be like just be the bare bones, and you wouldn't have the emotional impact that we do. So it's a really important part. So yeah, if someone's thinking about making a narrative game, we do not underestimate the power of audio. So I guess in talking about voices, there's a segue smoothly. It's tricky one. Segue smoothly into talking about Tuve's journal. So obviously we have dialogue in the game. Dialogue lines that be the things that the character will say externally. But we also have a Tuve's journal in the game. So as you go into new areas, she'll scribble maps. It's very much like her journal and insight into her record of adventures. And this is used to help orientate the player in the world. It helps build up background lore, so another storytelling layer. It's kind of an optional layer. So we want to give players the option that if they want to dig into the background lore of the game, they can, but it's not something we force them to sit through, because different people want to play differently, right? And so when you meet new characters, having a journal entry that you can read through gives that optional storytelling layer to the player to engage with if they want to. It also allows us to help guide the player through puzzles and things like that. But I guess the really powerful thing about it from a storytelling point of view is that it allows access to a different voice for Tuve. So the journal is like her inner thoughts, maybe the things that she wouldn't vocalize externally. And so I guess it gives us another window into the character and another storytelling opportunity the player can dig into. And maybe it's some more intimate thoughts that she wouldn't want to voice, some of her concerns. I think having that different aspect and window into what's going on with her just makes her more of a rounded character, I think, more believable.
Yeah, definitely. It gives her depth. I think without it, there's a danger she might have come across as a bit irreverent or kind of just naive and not really aware of the event. I mean, like, her brother's been taken by a monster is pretty bad stuff. But she is kind of fairly upbeat and resourceful as a character. And that was deliberate because we wanted to make sure that the game didn't come across as like this really overwhelmingly bleak experience. So we wanted to give ourselves some, to be able to have some highs and lows. But the flip side of that, as I say, is that there's a danger that she might just seem like she was immune to emotion. And Alex says the journal actually allows us to show what she's scared of, to write it down, to write down what she remembers from her past or what she misses or how she's feeling about her father and brother, and not in like really weighty way, just in like, I'm worried about him, I'm scared, like I can be honest here because this is my book. Maybe when I'm not in there I need to project something, I need to project a version of myself that I'm not actually feeling inside, but I need to put that out there as a way of coping with it myself. If I project it, maybe I'll feel it more, but also as a way of meeting these different creatures and stuff. And it's kind of like her way of like puffing up her chest and going out to face the adventure, which we all do, and actually more often than not that's not the reality of what people feel like inside. Everyone has their own kind of insecurities and doubts, and so the journal is our way of showing that to the player, showing that she is actually just a kid with her own fears and and doubts, as I say. And actually, that I think that's been really powerful and really helped to flesh her out, as Alex says, and really make her a more rounded character.
Yeah, it gives her a lot of depth. I'm guessing one thing we haven't spoken about yet in terms of like Tuve's fears, and we talked a bit at the start about storytelling through gameplay, and one thing we have spoken a little bit about is that at various points in the game, like key sections, Tuve will be forced to enter distorted memories from her past, and so we don't really front load the game with exposition. That's pretty dull. What we like to do is for the player to basically unearth that stuff and piece the pieces together. And there's these key sequences that like waking memories of Tuve will go into
Flashback.
yeah, flashback, but it's all quite Alice in Wonderland. It's all quite distorted, but it allows you to look at perceptions that she had of things that had happened, but do it in quite and confront some of these memories and come to terms with them. And there's a certain amount of acceptance there of her realizing, what actually happened. But doing that stuff through gameplay, and they're quite magical, where everyday objects can become large and enchanting. And so that kind of abstraction of her memories and exploring them via gameplay, we thought was a really nice way of exploring some of those emotions and themes, but also embracing the power of video games as an interactive medium. So yeah, I think they were they're a really important part of the game, and there's not loads of them, but they have quite a weighty impact, I think.
Yeah, there's kind of four key memories, and they are. I think there's a few aspects to them that make them, I think make them work well, in that you have this sense of Tuve's past and that something bad has happened and you don't know what it is, but that's potentially quite a difficult thing to entwine with the normal story. So having these separate almost flashbacks that she goes into, it allows for a degree of separation. So it's like, okay, well, now this bit, the majority of the game is her proactively trying to get to her brother and save him, but these bits are very much about her and her own kind of reconciliation with her past and the trauma essentially that happened to her when she was quite young that has caused her to create false memories. It's about her going back and working through them to find out what the truth was, and then taking that truth and owning it and becoming stronger through it. And that's kind of really important for her own kind of self-growth. And you experience it all as the player, so you're kind of there with her, proactively exploring these memories. And I think that helps you kind of really empathise with her situation, helps you engage with what she's trying to do, and it helps you actually be there when you're solving them and working out what's gone awry and what the truth is. And I think it's a far more powerful way, and that's something that you can only really do in games. So for us to kind of use all those tools at our disposal, we were like, well, it'd be such a waste to not do something like that. And yeah, I think it's been really successful.
Yeah, so I'm guessing we're coming to the end of our chat. I'm guessing to recap, we're talking about holistic storytelling. It's about embracing all the different opportunities and basically using all the tools at our disposal. I'm sure there are more to try and create a story that's as impactful and as interactive as possible. So yeah, not just the script and dialogue, which obviously can be critical if you're making a storytelling game with dialogue. But also like the music, the cinematography, the lighting, the animation. There's all loads of elements that can be layered up to make a really impactful full story, and that's our studio ethos. Obviously, there are other people have different approaches, which is what makes the variety available in indie games so wonderful. So yeah, we'll probably wrap things up there. If you'd like to find out more about the studio and the game, so the game is out now on Steam and GOG. It's coming shortly to Switch, and our studio Twitter account is @Poly Treehouse. If you'd like to follow us, we give a lot of updates there. But yeah, thank you very much for listening, and hopefully you found it interesting. But if you have any questions about the talk, yeah, ping us.
Get in touch. Awesome.
Thank you.
Day, evening, night, wherever you are.
One of them.
Cheers. Bye.